Well, hello everyone. Welcome to Basic Binges, part of Nom Talk Network. On this show, we review popular shows that are out now while eating and drinking our favorite binge-worthy snacks and drinks. It seems like I sort of betrayed Nom Watch. Like it seems like I've just betrayed Nom Watch and I've totally just killed it, and now I'm just a basic binger. And so it's just like, well, here we are. This is where it is. We're just, doing all that. So, anyway, I will get back to review soon. But it's good to see you all on Basic Binges. This was if you don't know, I'm your host, Jordyn Orozco, and right now I'm enjoying a few things right now because I'm starving. So I have a wedge salad with some blue cheese dressing and my mom's green chili cheese enchiladas. And so I'm like really excited to eat because I'm starving, and then just some good old water in my little flask. But I'd like to introduce my lovely and wonderful guests who I've had on multiple of my shows. I've been guests on Alejandro's show, but it's so good to see you, Alejandro and Bill. Let's start with you, Bill. What are you chomping on? What are you
So
doing?
let's
What's
see.
going
We've
on?
got we've got two things. I do have my regular, Coke Zero, which all the
Yeah,
thing. However,
I'd be
with it being
disappointed.
Rings of Power, we had to deal with a Tawny Port, probably about a 10-year-old, 12-year-old, something like that. So we'll be sipping on that as well. And of course, for the nibblies, just some of Whole Foods brown sugar chocolate chip cookies.
Yum. Okay, so I thought briefly you said chocolate chip pickles, and I was like,
Ew.
that's interesting.
No,
Yeah.
no, that was good.
Okay. And Alejandro, I know you're trying to focus your camera. Oh
No, I'm here. I'm sorry. Hello. I'm semi blurry. I'll get all cleared up very soon or later. But I'm like you. I got a whole bunch of combination here. I got some dumplings and some pasta and some buttered toast over here, and then I got some chocolate chip cookies over here too as well, and some a
Oh,
lot of
nice.
bubbly water and some additional canteen of water here that Steph got me all stocked up on. So got to stay hydrated because I don't want to dehydrate, one of those things. So, hey, I'm back to being clear. Look at that. I mentioned water, and it was like the
yeah,
universe is
there it
back to
is.
where it needs to be. So, yeah.
They're like, I'm gonna purify your camera." Q said just ate two grilled cheese sandwiches, and right now I'm drinking a bottle of water. Good for you. Stay hydrated. Everybody needs to stay hydrated. I wish I had a glass of port though. That actually sounds really
I
good.
got some here for
Um,
you.
oh man, let me just get on a flight, man. And just
Hold up.
go up there.
See, and for the record, Bill and I missed you so much. So, since you weren't in our neck of the woods, we wanted to come over to your neck of the woods over here at Basic Binges. So, I'm telling you, man, we missed you. That's how it was.
I know. It's like, gee, you're just calling me back. Well, if any of you don't know, from the PR and from anything that's going on, today we are going to talk about the Rings of Power, episode 4, which came out on Friday. Let me tell y'all, I am loving this show. I am having such a good time watching it. It's really hard. I try to watch it, on the weekends when I can sit and have like a nice meal and I can just sit and watch it, but it's really hard to just like make a meal and then like try to eat it and then like throw it. Like I kind of just want to sit and like watch it. And so I think I'm for the next one I'm just going to do it when I either can sit in my room and just watch it straight through, because I get interrupted a lot if I watch it in the living room. But I am loving where this series is going, and I think Bill, you and me were kind of chatting last time with our review in the Sandman on what was it, last Wednesday, about just sort of like you sort of like saying like it's the lore, it's all about what's going on and how they just sort of lumping these together. And I know you did tell me a couple things that have happened, and in this episode we kind of see Numenor and a foreshadowing of what might happen to the
Mhm.
city, right? And so, or the island, and so it's just really really exciting. But how are we all enjoying this so far? What did we all think? Did we all think that it was a good lead up to episode 4? Let's start with you, Bill. How are you liking the show so far?
So I like it a lot. I come to Rings of Power out of being a longtime Tolkien fan. Granted, I started off reading it when I was young and tried reading like the Silmarillion and the Lost Tales and some of the other, you know, periphery books, and I bounced
Mm.
off them for years. I get it like 10 pages into it going, no, at 12, this is I no. And it took a while to finally get into the stuff. And now it's kind of like seeing where Amazon is taking like the various narratives is a lot of fun. And
Mm.
you get all the various name drops and places, and you kind of see how they're choosing to pick things back together. Um, and so I'm enjoying it in a couple of different levels. I've been seeing where people kind of have struggles with it, particularly around if people aren't familiar with the names and the places and what's going on. but at the same time, it's kind of like the difference between, like we're talking about gaming, like computer gaming. You have casual gamers and hardcore gamers, right? This is not a casual viewer type of show. You need to either sit down, take notes, be focused, or it's just going to bounce off, and you're like, who's the pointy-eared one, and which one, what's going on where? Because we have about 5 different storylines all running with various levels of depth, with Gladriel being the main through line of the whole thing so far. And so I'm digging it. I can see where other folks would have more of a challenge of it, but at the same time, not all shows need to have everything spoon-fed. And so if you're okay with just going along for the ride and figuring things out as they go, it's cool. You're not going to get a full hour backstory like we started out with Fellowship of the Ring back when Jackson movies came out. You got all that first half hour or 45 minutes just of setup and getting things through. Now we're kind of having to figure things out as we go.
Yeah, and I kind of like your analogy because as you're like, this is not for the faint of heart, right? Like where if you're thoroughly invested in Lord of the Rings, or if let's say for example, like I'm a huge gamer, right? Like if I'm playing, like if I start in on Mass Effect 3, I'm not gonna know what the fuck's going on in the game, right? I didn't play Mass Effect 1 and 2. And technically, yeah, you can play the game and be like, okay, cool, this is a really good sci-fi game. But like if you haven't played 1 and 2, you're like, I have no idea who Shepard is. You're right, like what's going on. And so I kind of like that where it was like there are some things where I don't even know what's going on because I haven't read the Lost Tales and I barely touched on the Silmarillion and had to watch like a 10-minute video of it and like just kind of like get through what I needed to get through. But I'm understanding enough to where I'm like, oh, like this is a deep dive into this the before times, right, of what we sort of were exposed to like pop culturally when I was like in high school and middle school. So Alejandro, how are you liking it so far? How are you liking the lead up to episode 4?
I'm what you call a introverted extrovert, and I noticed as a kid. And for me, it was more along the lines of being introduced to this world was from my mom. The Hobbit. The Hobbit was the introduction to this world for me as a kid, and there's been so many moments in that of men, elves, dwarves, of orcs, of goblins, of eagles, of so many things there, and so much tears and excitement that it built up to a slow introduction and a reintroduction to the Sumerian, to the Lord of the Rings, of the trifecta and so forth of it. And all my readings were all done in my early teenage years. So to me, it was very, very, my world was very, very Tolkien. It was all over, very detailed. So the build up to 4 was exciting to me in a sense because it had hints of things that obviously were different tales, but of shout outs to Bilbo Baggins, of things that I don't want spirit spoil the your introduction to it, but the certain different style ore that they found later on that I'll let you talk about. It's just so great, in a sense that it's finally there. I know I'm a little late in regards to joining you guys in the discussions because in the previous discussions you guys had, and I understand that some people talked about of a slow build up. I'm a sucker though for Tolkien, and Tolkien's always been a slow buildup. I mean, this is a guy it reminds me a little bit of Clancy at times. Sometimes he will give a little more detail to the grass than a lot of people would expect, but at the same time, I'm an individual that wants to know what their grass is doing and how it's doing from the angle and the sunlight. It's I know it's ridiculous sometimes, but to me, it felt different, and it felt like there was tales that I have never heard before. And yes, there were some nods, and yes, there are a lot of references to the Tolkien universe that you will understand full-heartedly being a fan of The Hobbit, Lord of the Rings, and so forth. So honestly, as you can tell right now, I'm hyped. I thought it was great.
Oh, there we go. I was muted. Thank you. My computer let me know. So let's just dive into it. So we open the episode with Arendir meeting Adar, right? And we have no clue at the end of episode 3 who this individual is. Some of us did. I kind of had a feeling. And basically, we realized that there's an elf leading these orcs on this sort of quest to clear out these lands, right? That they're going through. And Adar is this mysterious, and Bill, you might be able to shed some light on who Adar eventually is or becomes. But he is an elf that turned away from all elvish things, and basically tries to convince Arendir that it's a lie. Everything that he believes in and the religion that he follows and everything that he has sort of held close to him is a lie. And we sort of just get a hint of uh, who this individual is. And eventually Erender is let go, but only if he agrees to give a message to the people that are being housed in the watchtower that were in the town that sort of got raided by these orcs. So what who and I guess we'll start with Alejandro first, and then we'll go to Bill. How did we feel about Adar? How did we feel about sort of his message? Did we get an idea of what might be coming from this character? And we'll start with Alejandro.
Just in general, the character was very, very to me in regards to being dark, menacing, and all out what I expected to who this individual is supposed to be. At this point, we understand he's elf, and I'm hyped up because I mean, those that know the lore of orcs in Tolkien's universe will totally like understand that how hyped and exciting this is because it's a reveal that technically is only mentioned in previous books of history and lore. It's never actually discussed from the lips of elves, nor is it orcs of the history of the two races and how they actually are. So him actually mentioning that, what you believe is a lie is just like visually seeing it on screen. Because, yeah, coming from expectations and seeing Lord of the Rings on film, each film for 3 hours, it was fantastic seeing what was going on. But Lord of the Rings itself is only one tale, and this one tale is the tale of this individuals, of this society and what they fight, and it doesn't really cover the history like Sumerian or the Lost Tales do. So actually seeing it on screen and revealed, and you're like, oh my god, here we go, it's about to be spilled. Politics are about to come in, possibly. The hints of religion and just spiritual. Oh man, need to say, very hyped was in introduction, and I thought it was well reserved on my end.
So one of the things I do want to connect and um very briefly is that we do know that basically in the Lord of the Rings, we find out that Uruk-hai are basically transformed elves, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. And so seeing this sort of like begs the question of, is this going to be the first Uruk-hai? Is he going to be the one that's going to turn these elves, right, like against sort of their own and start, an army of Uruk-hai for Sauron, right? Bill, let's go to you. What did you think of this? Did you think it was any foreshadowing or foreboding? Oh, you're muted.
One's for me. The so Edar is Edar is not a canonical character. So that's one, that's fun. Again, for if you've read all the books and read all the stories and all that sort of stuff, it's nice to have things that are slightly different. Otherwise, you're always going to know what's coming on next. And so that's where I think it's going to be an interesting kind of thing to see where they pivot with him, because you know who is this and what is this character really? Is it really an elf? Is it something else? Is it another creature or a power or an entity? We've got Gandalf running around at this point, so we can have any other sorts of characters. And I think that's kind of like part of the hook right now with Edar is kind of like, it's something clearly powerful. It's something, it's a critter that the orcs are deferring to. And it's talking about how, it kind of has a perspective of the story that's very different than anybody else's. And so, that kind of alludes to, who or what it might be. So, I mean, I'm enjoying what they're doing with it.
Sure.
Also, too, if I may add, I'm sorry to interrupt, but also, this is the point where we actually see orcs show emotion for the first time. We've always seen like orcs being, like ravenous creatures, and knowing that their history has been, related to elves, you think in the sense that like, okay, cool, you're not only a dark elf, you're like a mutated form of what you once were. So now we've only seen hate because like orcs, goblins, and so forth, and now at this moment, this individual, as we have Adar comes up and like everybody sombers out, like respect. You can see like actual like I would say remorse in these guys' eyes, and these are people that have just slaughtered elves just for the hell of it and laughed at it, and all of a sudden it was like bam, back to this is an entity, as Bill said, a supernatural power, the supernatural being step forth, and that's to me that kind of was very, very effective.
Yeah, and I think it's important to point out that, like, you're right, orcs in general, and like especially they don't have emotion, right? Like, there's none of that. So, is this character actually bringing some elvish sort of qualities to the orcs, right? Like, are we going to see some type of like you said, spirituality coming to play a little bit in this character. I want to go all the way across the world and across the sea to basically what the next scene is, which is in oh my god, the island city, and I can't remember the name.
Oh my lord. I'm gonna have to
Numenor?
look up myself.
Which one? Are you talking Numenor?
Yes, thank you.
Yes,
Numenor. Jeez, why couldn't I literally have it? Oh, I have it written down. Wow.
It's okay. No
Anyway,
worries, no worries.
we go we fast forward to the Queen Regent Muriel and Galadriel and Halbrand. Basically, long story short, Galadriel requests an audience with the Queen Regent after going to the Hall of Lore and basically saying that trying to convince the Queen that Halbrand is the descendant of royalty, which is in the Southlands. So she basically tries to convince the Queen Regent that she needs to take up arms and go and fight basically with him to take back these lands. Otherwise, Sauron will rise and will take over those lands. Basically, the Queen Regent says, "No, bitch, like we're not doing it." And then Galadriel, I was so excited this scene came up. She was like, oh, "Okay, you want to play?" And then she's basically like, "Well, I wanted to actually talk to the real king." She's like, "I want to talk to the real power here." And basically, the Queen Regent's like, "Oh, so you want to play this game?" And basically jails Galadriel for basically not insubordination, but basically trying to overstep her bounds and overstep her powers as Queen Regent and trying to talk to the king. And so later on, she basically is ordered to sail back to the Elflands with an armed guard. But we also want to keep in mind that Halbrand basically teaches her kind of a lesson that basically says, you've been trying to get what you want with a fist, and you need to temper yourself and you need to try to talk your way into sort of, you know, getting the things that you need, right? So she basically ends up freeing herself and then runs amok about the town and basically climbs the tower in to see the actual king and finds out that he's basically bedridden and he cannot he can't even speak. He barely can speak and talk to his own daughter. And basically, the Queen Regent tells the story of the historical of what happened to the elves and what happened to her father and why she is so hesitant. And basically, we get this was the exciting part because I did see this in the previews where she has access to a Galanthir. What is it called? The Seeing Stone.
Palantir?
Thank you. It was a P, it wasn't a G, to a Palantir, which we also have seen in The Lord of the Rings and the Two Towers when Saruman uses it to sort of see stuff, right? And we are also taught that they're evil, right? That they are not supposed to be touched because Sauron can use it to sort of see who is seeing through these stones. But in this one, the Queen Regent has used it and sees that there was a prophecy and basically a vision of Numenor getting destroyed by waves. And Bill, I know you threw that onto me the last time we were talking about it, and I was like, I looked it up, and it's basically like Numenor is basically like the Middle Earth Atlantis, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like it's
Yeah.
basically like what happens to that island. So let's talk about this because this was a lot. I didn't even mention Isildur or what happens to him in this sort of area as well. But let's talk about the Queen Regent and Galadriel. Did we see any sort of foreboding? And before we get to sort of what happens at the end of the episode, did we see this coming? Was this something that added to Galadriel's character, Queen Regent? Do we feel a little bit more empathetic towards Queen Regent? Bill, let's start with you. How did we feel about this part of the episode?
Um,
A lot.
it kind of well, it's a lot. It's also kind of like depends on what you want to talk about based on book reader or show watcher. And so let's stick with show watcher. Um, and let's just go with the basics. If you're a watcher that you only watch, say, the Peter Jackson films, right?
Sure.
If that's the case, then you might be going in. Remember what Wormtongue did in Two Towers and stuff like that. And so, okay, are we going to have the same sort of poisoning case again? Why is the king sick? Is it actually the bad guys that are doing something? Now, the question to you is feeling empathy or not is, do you think the Queen Regent is part of the reason why he's in that state? Whether she's conscious of it or not, is she being manipulated, or is it just something that happened and she's going into this completely natural? but her being the one that's getting the prophetic vision of what's going to happen. And also remember what she says in the episode when she's talking about the Palantir. The Palantirs have parrots, right? This one
Yeah.
doesn't have this one doesn't have a second piece, but yet
Mhm.
they're still touching the thing. Which, number one, that's bad.
Yeah.
Because you're not going to get just like a busy signal on the other end. Something's going to be listening. And so that's where, as soon as she starts touching it, so she's clear, Queen Regent knowing this, she's touched it, and a human touching it, it may not have the best of effect. So where her head's at, knowing or otherwise, is a little bit questionable. So it was a really surprise to get up there. The king's not really in the condition as advertised. Not a huge shock, just kind of maybe the specifics around it are.
Yeah. And also, now that you said that, this begs the question: is this the Palantir that Saruman uses in the Fellowship of the Ring?
It is not.
Right? Because
Remember, they have a matched pair that they were using. It was between Saruman and yeah, that's a different.
got it. Okay. Because I saw that and I don't know, right? Like I'm like, oh, I don't know what's going on. And then this one I was like, I thought there were she's like there some of she said they're lost, according to her. Like most
Right.
they're all lost except for this one. And I was like, no, they're not. I was like, girl, no, they're not. Alex, what did we think of this part? Did we think it was any foreboding to what's coming up with Numenor? Did we think that the Queen Regent made the right decision to trust Galadriel with this information?
I mean, at this point, I'm going to be real. Anybody familiar with the Tolkien universe is going to realize that this foreboding situation, or this, I would say, miscommunication between elves, humans, and dwarves is going to be a common thing. So at this point, I feel as if the elves have been that like sophisticated society that was supposed to be out there and be beneficial for the land. And then unfortunately, I still think they fell victim of just the casual ability of just being a being, and being that natural being, as supernatural as you are, you're going to be victim to the wants of what a being with a heart wants, power and respect. So unfortunately, in that situation, given that they had a huge battle out before, there seems to be a caste system in society. So now you have a situation where humans actually have this huge and beautiful land, such as Queen herself has at the moment. She's in this position of power in which now her father, that we know at this point, has ultimate respect to the elves, and at some point has have foreshadowed some things through speakings. And Bill, you mentioned before, we don't know if this is a poison tongue for references before of tales in the past of Lord of the Rings, or previous tales. Now, I do see this frustration between elves and humans a natural thing. It's going to happen. For some odd reason, we see in every realm miscommunication. Let's be real. Cities that don't talk to each other, or friends that don't talk to each other in distance, for miscommunication. If you don't talk to each other, you're not as close as you used to be. And we text somebody, and it's like, unless they're a really good friend, it's like, oh, you haven't talked to me forever. So I'm putting on that minuscule level, and now we are talking about societies that haven't talked to each other in years, and frankly are insulted by each other. So I feel as if this battle that's happened in this past, what's going on now, claiming that the scourge of the earth, that orcs are gone, mystically or not, you have elves coming back saying, no, there's something, there's something still here. We're here to help. In reality, humans are like, no, we don't need your help. We did what you said. We did, get out. You go where you need to go. And I just feel as if this has always been building up to this point anyway. So I do feel like it bubbled up to that to this situation right now.
Yeah.
One thing to note about the Palantir that's always interesting about them is there's a handful of times that they're used throughout the books, right? And fewer yet that was in the movies. But what they see through, what a viewer sees through it, is never interpreted correctly. In each case, they think it's one thing, but it's actually something else. Because like Sauron, looking through it, sees Aragorn with sword and everything. So he's like, oh, he's got the ring. He's going to attack Mordor. Yada yada yada. But what was it really? Is the ring was on its way to Mordor. Aragorn's over way on the other side. Each of the instances is it's never correct, but the viewers will think it's correct, and that will influence them wrongly. It's the whole thing about like getting a prophecy, and you think it means one thing, but it means something else, even though both versions are literally true.
Yeah, that world in general, with that kind of dark magic, if you notice, whether it's the ring reference or anything with dark magic in general, as you said, it's always an alternate version. It's always skewed in general. So I can that excellent point. That I totally agree with you on that one.
So her even seeing the vision of here's the destruction or why the destruction is
Mm-hmm.
likely she's going to interpret it entirely wrong.
True, which we did get sort of a rough translation when she said this vision starts with you arriving to Numenor.
Right.
Like you were, and assuming that Galadriel was the reason why Numenor gets
Right.
thrown
Or it could
in.
be just as likely it's what it really is in one way, that's true. But in the other way, it's the actions that the Queen Regent is going to begin to take
Yeah.
is what actually causes it.
Yeah. This was definitely an interesting part, and sort of I it was one of those moments where I was like, okay, Galadriel was a badass, and then I was like, oh, but you did it at the wrong time, right? Let's travel all the way across the mountains and under them to talk about Elrond and Durin and this entire exchange of what Durin actually found and was trying to keep a secret from Elrond. I just want to say I love Robert Aramayo, who plays Elrond. I thought they picked a great person to do it. I mean, come on, he was young Ned Stark. Like, how could you not pick this dude? But I just like what he's doing with Elrond. I think he plays a very young, naive, but frankly very intelligent Elrond, and it's sort of giving way to sort of who Elrond basically becomes later on in the series or in the Lord of the Rings. But I do want to definitely talk about this. I know it was definitely, I think it was the first episode that we ever did. It was Rings of Power, the one, and it ended with the dwarves opening a chest, and it was something shining in it. And I remember after on the stream, me and Eric's partner were like, we were going back and forth whether he thought it was the Arkenstone. I said it was Mithril. I was like, it's too early to be the Arkenstone. It's too early to be that. I was like, it is not early enough to be Mithril because this is exactly what it is. It's silver and it's shining. I know exactly what it is. So in this episode, we get it confirmed that through deception, but then also through Elrond sort of figuring two and two together, finds the mine and the vein that Durin has been digging, and basically he swears on the mountain to not tell, but basically Durin says that they are digging mithril. They don't know what its capabilities are yet. They don't know that they could harbor it for armor or anything yet. They just know that it is some different type of material, and the dwarves are sort of keeping it. And they don't want people to know about it because then they pretty much know that people will want to hoard and mine this material. But I loved this sort of let's just stay here for a minute in this area of Middle Earth. I loved this interaction with Jordyn and Jordyn's father sort of in the end. And we did see basically when Elrond and Durin were talking in the mine that there was a cave in and there was a collapse. I thought one of the most beautiful scenes in the entire series so far is when Jordyn's wife sings to the mountain to open up and to spare and to make sure that these dwarves live. And it was interesting because Elrond sort of, we see this, like we see it happening, and we see it sort of happening in real life, where I kind of like how there's this lore that we sort of heard in Lord of the Rings, right? Of like dwarves, like basically like learning how to move and learning how to mine these mountains with and basically becoming a part of them, and the mountains sort of like responds to them in a way, right? And we actually get to see this in real life in this series, and it was just beautiful. And all the miners survive, right? They get pulled out, but King Jordyn basically says we need to shut down the operation, shut down the mine, and Durin gets mad and basically huffs off, and Elrond is the person to basically tell him, like, I didn't have time with my father. You at least have yours here. And so if there was one thing that I regret, it's the fact that I couldn't tell. I didn't have that moment or that chance of peace with my father. He was like, basically was like, you need to appreciate the fact that you still have your father, and that, all that. And then basically him and his father, settle and decide, he's going to go with Elrond on this mission, but be cautious about it because there's something not right in this. And so, how did we feel about this? I know, Bill, you probably have more perspective than I do, but I kind of feel like this is going somewhere. I know in the previews, it's no shock to everybody, but we do see the Balrog in the previews, so I don't know if it's going to make an appearance towards the end of this series of these episodes or of this season. But I do know it's fast and coming, sort of, with this whole mining of mithril. But let's start with you, Alejandro. What did you think about this area and this sort of the mountains and this sort of interaction with Elrond and Durin?
Uh, hyped. I get memories of Lord of the Rings, just references of the relationships or the joking, but close yet mythical relationships between elves and dwarves. They are a perfect shining example of that. Going into the fact that at this point, it's interesting to see, being, having Elrond actually, being introduced to the family, Durin's family, and just being there and embracing and just seeing the family who they are. Them actually embracing Elrond, wanting to know tales of him and if the stories are real between him and Durin. And to me, I find, and I know it's unrelated, but at the same time, I'm a big little, oh, is this truly an Easter egg? Or I might be overthinking, but they're tales of the three orgs that, they say one, I was two, oh, it was three, I the one that, took care of them, and this is how we met. And in reality, I'm thinking back to The Hobbit and Frodo and him actually evading the three orgs and all the way to the sunlight and, coming in and them turning into stone. So, and I know it's totally different related in that sense, but to me, it's still, little memories of possible tales and so forth. But the relationship, I think, is actually expressed beautifully, especially in this argument and so forth in a situation. You do see them, or the discussion of, hey, why are you here? Why are you actually here? I mean, yes, it's good to see you, but you understand that there's still some uneasiness of the relationship between elves and other races. And that between the distress we see from the queen and the distrust that we see from Durin at the situation. But it's beautifully put, and I think that the actor Robert did an excellent job of portraying the fact that, hey, I don't, as a character, I'm not here to go ahead and get one over on you. I don't care what it is, but I want to know what it is because I care about you. This is something you can't, hold from each other. And honestly, I squealed. I asked Steph, I squealed when I heard the term, of what Mithril Wills. I was like, oh my God, there's this reference. I Frodo, so in the past, what he wears, and to me, I was so happy when I heard it in general. But without going too much, and side off going on, I believe the relationship between them two is fantastic, especially when you actually had Princess Dysa, like you said. Oh God, it was a beautiful scene. Her singing in general, and the fact that you have that communication between not only between of Elrond and Prince Durin, but also King Durin. They express, I think it was really beautifully put, because in previous, I would say, tales, I'm not saying that the dwarves were portrayed as ignorant, but I do say that they were portrayed as like foolhardy and always, excitement being that person. And you always hear, like you said, you always hear the tales of their kingdoms in the mountains and in the rocks. And you see unfortunate previous, entities of what it used to be. Unfortunately, you see a lot of times of them destroyed because of, we mentioned, Belrog situation and goblins and orcs and orgs in general as well. Because but it's good actually to see something there. But in this situation, the discussion between the king, prince, and princess, and actually the visiting elves, I believe it shows intelligence from the dwarves, saying, "Look, all right, you established that that's this relationship with the elves. It doesn't seem to be harmful. Now go find out what the heck they want." And I thought that was cool. To me, that was like, all right, cool. Yeah, the dwarves are like with stature, are strong, are mighty. At the same time, they're smart, and the fact that this beautiful relationship between elf and and dwarf has been going back and forth, and now you see the king say this to his son that, all right, I see this man seems to be a man of or an elf in honor of a person of being an honor. Go ahead and figure out what the heck they want. So I thought it was beautifully portrayed, and I thought that was a nice little slew in and a nice little nod into dwarves as well.
Yeah, definitely. Bill, what did we think about this little bromance and also this little sort of unease between this unease between dwarfs and elves right now?
Well, I mean, it's got it's funny because on the one hand, we could say that in all pretty much in all fantasy settings and world settings, it's always there's a rivalry, sometimes more angry, sometimes more friendly rivalry between dwarves and elves, and they all look down on humans. But looking back on it, that starts here. That starts with Tolkien, right? Kind of setting up the differences, and it has a bit to do with where their areas or domains are. Nobody really trusts elves by the sheer virtue of their longevity, right? Because like they're around for so long that they can play a long game without breaking a sweat. And for them, 1,000 years it's no big deal to them. I mean, looking at how long, we got Galadriel running around right now, and she's effectively reads as a young woman at this stage of the game, but there's 24 generations between where they're at now and what happens in the War of the Ring for the Return of the King, right? So, and those are long generations too, because um good old Aragorn, he's got partial elf blood in him, that whole line. So they're like, they don't live 70 years, they live a couple hundred years each, except for the ones that die in battle. So you got a long time, you got 3,000 to 4,000 years between then, between where we are now and what happens then. And so everything from, like we were talking earlier about the emotions and the orcs, I mean, to an extent, they're not fully resolved down to the versions that we've seen later. The Uruk-hai haven't bred up yet. The hobbits haven't developed. Many of these races are still in their formative stages. But when it came to how the races separated, the dwarves went down and the elves kept their nose up in the clouds and kind of kept aloof of the rest of them. You can see a lot of parallels between Tolkien's elves and even Vulcans in many ways, that they portray themselves, they're above emotions, even though we all know that's full of shit, but they play it. But in the same way, Vulcans really manifest the same way. And the same thing, how the lessons that Galadriel learned, that she's got to not just come in with guns blazing. How many times did Spock have to learn that there's a different way to go about things to achieve an end? You can't only go at it one way. It usually has to do with empathy, which applies in both of these cases. But overall, the storyline, also, I learned something new, because when it came for Mithril, because I always pronounce it wrong. With Mithril, it's always, I thought of it strictly as a silver steel alloy that the dwarves had concocted rather than it being mined. I'm like, oh, okay, that's cool. So to be completely honest, when they open up that chest and you kind of see the glow out of it, my first thought is, shit, they found the suitcase from Pulp Fiction. They should just left that right there. And
leave it.
No, I dug it.
Yeah, and it's interesting to point out that the mithril armor that we do see in Lord of the Rings, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that was elven made, which they obviously would have to get the mithril from the dwarves, right? And just a little quirky, in order for you to make any sort of type of mithril armor, you need that ore to get into bars, and then you can sort of make armor out of that. So you're not completely wrong. They do have to sort of like melt it and then turn it into sort of like a bar, which they normally have to do. But yeah, it's interesting to see that it's actually an ore that they can actually mine and get out of there. I love this part. I love going back to Khazad Dûm and just sort of seeing the inner workings of how a city that we saw that was gargantuan in Lord of the Rings sort of like be dead. I just like to see it in its prime and how it's sort of operating. So it's just cool. It's so beautiful to see. Let's go. Let's talk about sort of like the side stories. So Theo, who we've seen, is one of the kids that escaped the town that was getting thrashed in the Southlands by the orcs. He found one of, I guess you would want to say, found the sword that potentially becomes, a ringwraith sword, and he knows how to activate it, obviously with blood. But he in this is so people that are at the watchtower they're barely hanging on. They need food. And, the one that's running, which is Theo's sister, is not necessarily doing it she's doing her best, but not doing it in the most effective way. So basically Theo is like, I'm going to go get food. And she's like, you can't. And he's like, yeah, I am. I'm going to go. So he basically takes his friend. They go to the town that they're at during the day when there's sun, because orcs, spoiler alert, orcs cannot take the sun because their skin is not used to the sun, and they're used to just being underground, and so they have no I guess you would say, in scientific terms, ultraviolet protection on their skin, like we would if we were to go out in the sun. And so we then also see while they're raiding, while they're getting food, the sun goes away, and all of a sudden the orcs come out, and they discover Theo. His friend runs away. They discover Theo, and they discover that Theo has the sword. And so he gets trapped in this town. He's trapped in a well. Long story short, they end up he ends up trying to escape. he ends up getting caught, but then is saved eventually by Arendir, who comes along and basically says, "We have to go." And as they're escaping, they run into his sister, who is Brorin. I forgot her name. It starts with the B. And basically they meet and they get reunited at the watchtower, where Arendir basically says they're coming, and they're that basically that they're coming, and that they're going to take over the Southlands eventually. What do we think about this sword that Theo has? I know this is very interesting, and the orcs are clearly looking for it. Is this sort of, and Bill, I don't know if you know, but I have a feeling this is related to Sauron. I have a feeling that this was a sword, or it might be the previous one that they fought over. What was his name? It starts with the M.
Morgoth.
Yes, I have a feeling it has to do with either Morgoth or Sauron. Anyway, so let's start with you, Bill. What are theories on the sword? How did we feel about this part? Do we see anything more interesting coming along for these people?
Well, no, I'm sure. I'm sure it's all kind of coming together and bringing the threads somewhere. I mean, some of these characters may be, basically plot movers rather than actual characters in the whole midst of things. It was funny to see little Timmy down a well, because we just didn't have Lassie barking out back somewhere. But as far as the sword goes, I mean, it's too early, of course, for it to be anything ring wraith related.
Sure.
The moment. However, that doesn't mean that it's not either Sauron's weapons directly or indirectly. Because don't forget, I mean, we didn't really touch on it earlier, but like Sauron is a shapeshifter to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
So assuming that they lean into that with the series, it's like, who is he? Who's he's playing? It could have been, he's not just the 20-foot tall variant that you see later on. It's, he can be human, elf, dwarf, what have you, sized all the way along. Hobbit size would be a little strange, but you probably could. And so it may be, Adar, if we're going with that theory that Adar is actually Sauron in disguise, then you got all the orcs following him, and they're off, trying to find a sword that he dropped somewhere along the way. So that's possible. However, I expect that the kid's use of said thing, especially when it has to stab into him, will not have great effects on him at some point in time, because that'll start turning and corrupting him before long. So again, I want to see, all of these threads are interesting. They haven't yet gotten to the like, if you think of the series 24, that insufferable teenage daughter of what's his name's, just because every time you went to the side quest, you just wanted to stab it in the face and fast forward. Here, they're all pretty much helping the pieces come together.
Yeah. And it's definitely interesting now that you said that. When you said when we were just talking about the sword and how he's a shapeshifter, keep in mind too that Sauron also is a necromancer, and Adar looked dead. I don't know, to me, but he looked a little deady. He looked like a little zombie elf to me.
Right.
So I don't know. That might be something that we might want to keep track of later in later episodes, to see if that's something that he. And by the way, for those of you that don't know, if you are watching the show and you don't know what a necromancer is, shame on you. No, just kidding. But basically, Sauron is a necromancer who is basically a dark wizard who can bring dead things back to life, usually humans or any sort of type of creature. They have the ability to do that with spells or any type of magic. So it's just definitely interesting to see those parallels. Alejandro, what did we think about this little sort of like subplot in this episode?
I'm I only thing I disagree with you on this, Bill, is I do think it's actually in time for Wraith abilities. Now, what I mean by this, I don't think the Wraiths are going to be existing. I just think that the Wraiths and Saruman's power have come from an entity in general, and this entity is this. You have the ring references, people using the ring references of once. Let's paddle back to think of Frodo real quick with his ring and what he sees in the world that he actually experiences, and he actually sees Wraiths for who they are and the world around them. We notice the communication that Saruman and so forth uses as well, puts them in that realm as well, or something, predictability, or that, or entity that actually, empowers it or empowers these things. We know that swords become crowns. We know crowns have rings. We know that are pieces out there that Saruman technically owns or has relations to, or bet in the past or in the future. So this could be in my opinion, maybe nods to it in different entities. I'm not saying that's what they are exactly, but maybe of just hints of the world of introducing what these things are coming from, or where, or what these things notice or respect, so to speak. But also maybe it's just me, but I really hate Theo. There's no
Mhm.
I want to like Theo, but I want Theo to step on a hypothetical Lego. I don't like him at all. I do see the references we see, bringing in of the injury on his arm, therefore with OG Smith doing the same thing, saying this is what it is. To me, that gave me essences of Golem, or of Frodo in his bad days, or Bilbo Baggins in his bad moments. Every little similar, we see that similar look in those eyes, like, oh boy, there's something, you are tainted. Your life is tainted for sure. So, to me, I think this whole, I say, build up or introduction, I don't want to make a reference saying that, oh my God, I feel like I'm watching Star Wars and I see the reclone of the
Right.
Death Star. I'm hoping this is not the case. At this point, I'm a little nervous. I'm excited. I was just Steph. I was jumping up and down like, oh my God, this could be this, and this is all just fanboy theories on my end. There's nothing that is tangible other than the fact that there's references. But I'm so happy that you brought up the fact that dude looked dead when he came back and made references to orcs, because hypothetically speaking, that's what orcs are. Everybody is dead. They are of death. They are reborn and essentially full of hate for what they once were. So seeing somebody that is, all right, a godly like creature, or let's say a not godly like creature, let's say a martyr, or let's say a saint, so to speak, to the eyes of hypothetically these people. I don't know. To me, the build-up's great. I think it makes references to things that fans have known from the films, and if not the films, definitely from the books. You do see references in the build-up to families of possibly being those of Rohan, being those of the past. You see so many references that you're like, oh my God, I can see where these societies have possibly or might have started. I understand that in this world, nothing's concrete yet. Everything is more related to the Sumerian than any other universe, because all we know is dark entities, elves, dwarves, and those creatures beyond that. So, I mean, I don't know. Once again, I don't want to get off tangent, but I really do think it does some proper nods to the world. I think the proper nods to a possible darker universe beyond what we see of Middle Earth. So I do think that's a proper build up or a nod to it.
Yeah. And I definitely so yeah, great. We can skip Theo because I agree with you on the I'm like, there's just I'm not there's a I feel like that was like a I feel like this is like the Sandman's Rose is Theo, right? Like there's like a plot.
Right.
It's just like,
Right.
and it's not, it's for me, it's not giving for me. And like the sword could have easily just been put with someone else and it would have just been fine.
Yeah. Like I
I
said,
just
it's the whole thing is just they're there to get the plot from point A to point B, not because
yeah,
we're supposed to like care much.
yeah, right.
Hopefully,
Because
is that Theo?
I
I was
don't
like,
care.
Theo, just jump off the cliff, please. I'm okay.
Yeah, I don't care. Get caught in the well. It's fine. So really quick, I do want to talk about Isildur, since Isildur basically becomes an important, obviously, character during the battle of the Battle of the Rings. Isildur basically gets ousted from being on the ship along with his two friends, and this leads us to the very end, where basically the Queen Regent sees off Galadriel to the Elven lands with an armed escort, and there is a tree that is in Numenor that basically starts, how would you say, crying, sort of its leaves, and that tree was given to Numenor by the elves, correct? Um, and basically there was this, and she tells the island that basically it is said that when the tree starts to when the leaves start to fall from the tree, it is like the elves crying, because basically something is wrong. And that was her sign that she knew that turning away Galadriel's advice and Galadriel's suggestion was the wrong thing to do. So in the very end, she basically announces that she will be helping to take back the Southlands. With an army, she just needs volunteers. And in those volunteers, Isildur basically volunteers to do that. And so we start to see the beginning of what might be a push for the battle of sort of, the what might be, the Battle of the Rings, or the Battle of the Ring, and all of that. And so this was really exciting for me, because it was sort of that moment where things were starting to come together in a way where I was like, okay, cool. Like something like Galadriel's gonna go off. She's gonna probably learn how to become this like bad witch person and like do all that stuff, even though she's pretty badass already. And Isildur is basically gonna start to fulfill that destiny and start to fulfill what we've sort of seen in the latter movies. Um, how did we feel about the ending of this? How did we feel about what's to come? Do we feel like everything's falling into place, or do we feel like this is just the beginning of a really bad part of the Rings of Power? Alejandro, let's start with you.
Well, first, I'm caught between I don't know who I have a bigger man crush on is Isildur or going into Arondir either. Either two of those guys. I'm telling you, I'm like, man, both of those are pretty good lead men there. Now, in regards to that, I have a huge from not only Isildur but his family. I have a huge like Aragon vibe into the whole reference of men of who they are in respect to their family and their nod to the elves. Just in that sense. I do think it's a pretty decent character buildup. I do see somebody as a character that does not seem selfish, so to speak, and just gets naturally put in a leadership role in a possible unknown shady way or a shady, I'd say mission, so to speak. I do think the character out there, Max, he reflects that character very well. I don't see him as a martyr in a sense. If he is just a plot mover, it's going to suck to see him being offed. But we do know, as in the Tolkien universe, they get you to like a lot of characters, and unfortunately, Tolkien doesn't hint who they're going to off. So it's one of those things where I still think it's some decent, beautiful character development, especially of the captain of the whole unit, the unit. Because to me, from my understanding in the Tolkien universe, I only know that of those of rangers, of those of men out on land, forest, and mountains. So the sea is very, very unknown to me. So to see this Navy style, Navy-esque ability and of men not afraid to go out in the sea and to pursue it and be out there and be this kind of strength and actually willing to flex their muscles towards the elves themselves at the moment. I think this character, him and his father, it's just I think it's a decent introduction. I don't so far, if they continue the way they have told the story of them so far, I'd be happy. I just please continue this pace. Even I'm feeling a little worried because I believe that Ildador's homies that he got fired with him too, the little duo over there. I found him funny. I find him likable. So in a sense, I'm like, oh boy, it's gonna be a trio. I hope this is a good positive tale of the trio of them too as well. Because once again, I hate falling in love with the character and then 2 episodes later, I don't understand why I'm crying so much. This sucks. Why? The last time I did this was Lord of the Rings, chapter 24. And you don't want to do it again. Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit was my first book that I ever actually emotionally distraught and cried over the Battle of the Five Armies of who was lost among the dwarves and the companionship. So I'm getting a little nervous right now because personally, I'm liking some of the humans I'm being introduced to, and especially the dwarves. So at this point, without digressing too much, I do think the tale of, in my opinion, this is just my coda, the people of the sea. I think it's been well introduced so far.
Yeah, and Bill, how did we feel about the ending? Are there any insights from you that we should look at coming up?
No, I mean, I'm again kind of like uh uh was mentioned, you guys, it's coming together nicely. I like the pacing where it's headed. I mean, in the end, it's not hard threads to follow. It's you got Galadriel and her escapade is off trying to figure out what's up with Sauron. Does he actually come back? And we got to put him back in the ground again. You've got the elves and the dwarves, unbeknownst, working together to build what's going to be the forge to forge the rings. Because I know a lot of people, keep thinking Sauron forged the rings. He didn't. He only forged one ring. The elves forged all the rest.
Yep.
And then he went and hot linked them all together. And these pieces are coming together, and you've also got Gandalf's needing to come back into play. How much the hobbits are really gonna, or the proto hobbits are gonna end up being relevant?
Proto hobbits,
they kind of are. It's like, but it's the point is that it lends as to why Gandalf has an affinity for them, and it needs to get Gandalf into position so that he can unleash his respective kind of whoop ass at the right time. And so how far the story is going to get in this first season, will it actually be to forging of any of the rings? Will it just be when they're getting started? I mean, unless the pacing really changes, I I probably sense the end of the season being with the fall of Numenor. Will
Yeah.
kind of probably be where this is at, and then it will carry everything across the Middle Earth, and then we'll pick things up there. Because that would also be the reshaping of the world when that happens. But if it goes further, stuff like that, I'm not really sure. Nimloth that you were talking about, the tree of Numenor. That one is, of course, when things go sideways with it terribly, it will end up being Isildur that actually salvages a fruit from it and takes it and plants the tree over in Middle Earth, and that becomes several generations later. That's the tree. It's the white tree at the end of Return of the King from that whole family, but that's like what 3,800 years later.
The courtyards. Those courtyards look eerily alike. That I find very interesting.
It's the whole thing because they did it as an echo of where it came from, and so it's neat seeing these things. There's other series that would all be fan service, but here, because Tolkien set up this rich mythology and all of the stuff going through, they appeared in these places. It's not just oh, guess what, and the Mandalorian shows up. It's actually people are supposed to be in these places at these times, and it's been written that way since the 20s and the 30s.
That's insane. That's insane. Yeah, this episode was a lot. There was a lot of stuff that was, that could be unpacked. But I'm actually kind of glad they did it. And they did it without the proto hobbits in there. Which I'm gonna call them that from now on because that's brilliant. Or the blueprint hobbits, right? Like it's gonna be great. I'm excited to see episode 5 and all the rest of them. I cannot wait to see sort of how this series goes. This is episode 4. I think there's 8 or 9 in the entire season, which I applaud Amazon Prime for doing, because usually like there's like 6 or 7 and you're like, oh, okay, that's it. But there's like 8 or 9 in this. So I'm really, really happy and excited to see that. Which means we got a couple more weeks of material to cover. So I'm really happy. But that's all the time we have to talk about. The Rings of Power, episode 4. It was definitely a journey. I felt like we went on a journey. Like we basically covered all of Middle Earth except for the fields of the Nori and Gandalf. We didn't cover that, but I feel like we did cover a lot, so it was really awesome. But before we leave, I would like to know where we can find you both. Alejandro, where can we find you on the socials?
You can find me at IAMCOWIE. I am Cowie on Instagram, where I do daily reels, monologue posts, shenanigans, and themed videos. Or you can find me on TikTok at AMCOWIE, AM Cowie. Exact same shenanigans, or Crimson Cowie at Twitter, where I talk a whole bunch of trash.
Nice. And Bill, where can we find you on the socials?
You can find me on as Bill RW3 on socials everywhere.
And then anywhere else, like, do you do anything like?
Oh yeah, that one thing, nerdbot.com, various other channels, but start with Bill RW3 and Nerdbot. We can go from there.
Nice. And you can always find me, CityStars13 on Instagram. I tend to post a lot of stories that are funny, and I tend to ask very good questions on there that get answered sometimes and that don't. But yeah, it's been wonderful talking to you all. Thank you for tuning in. Be sure to join our Discord to keep the conversation going. Shout out to my guests, Alejandro and Bill. You are always welcome on my shows. You are always welcome to ask me to be a guest on any of your hosted shows, because I love you both. And you can listen to the show on Google Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and Twitch. All of our platforms are at Nom Talk Network. I'd like to shout out our lovely and wonderful and amazing producer, Steph. You're awesome. You do these things. You make them look beautiful and awesome and amazing. So we love you, and we definitely appreciate you. Oh my God. Like you guys live together. I believe this is make sure you tune into our next show, which is going to be Basic Binges. We're going to be doing Andor episodes 1 and 2. Oh my gosh, watch it. Everything. Oh yeah, Alejandro. Oh, wait, Alejandro's gonna do it. But yes, watch it, learn it, so that way we can have a wonderful and good conversation. Until then, I'm your host, Jordyn Orozco, and I hope you all have a non-horrific evening. Good night.
Nope.